we can create the most extraordinary material, but if it's not used by the teaching community and students, it's not worth doing.
Welcome to CXOTalk episode 838. I'm Michael Krigsman, your host, and we're discussing the impact of AI and technology on education with Simon Allen, the CEO of McGraw Hill.
McGraw Hill's been around for just over 130 years, and we are very proud as a company now. We call ourselves an education company as opposed to a publisher of old that some of your viewers may be aware. Because of how we've transformed our business. And we talked about that a couple of years ago, now to very much a digitally driven company that provides educational courseware materials across all of the learning life cycles. So we are one of very few companies globally that goes from pre-K all the way through 12th grade into university and college level, and then into graduate programs and the medical and research and scientific fields.
Can you give us an overview of the impact of technology and AI today on education through your lens as the CEO of one of the foremost educational companies in the world?
There has been a great deal of hysteria, frankly, around Gen AI just over a year ago, particularly with ChatGPT, as that was announced a while back. And I think one has to view with care when you're looking at the education environment and the education community, you have to be very careful about how you think about new technology and advancements which happen every day. And you have to be sure that you are thoughtful, you're very aware of your student base and your teacher requirements in how you think about implementing the latest technologies. Gen AI is no different. It isn't about being the first, actually, it's about being the best in how you incorporate these technological tools as we think about the education community. What we've done at McGraw Hill is focus, as we do with all new tech that appears, where can this technology be valuable? Where does it actually add expedience and real relief and joy to the teaching community, who are probably some of the most challenged and I would say right now stressed workers that we would see around the world. I have the pleasure of seeing educators all the time in what I do in every country in the world. And when I talk to teachers today, it's very, very telling just how much anxiety there is across the teaching community. What we need to do and what we've done is use technology in a way that reduces that anxiety, both for teachers and students, in a way that we can make sure that it is helpful to how they teach the class. And we focus very heavily on efficacy. And we need to make sure that our efficacy studies show that when we incorporate Gen AI tools into our content and into our platform, we do it in such a way that it eases the administrative burdens of teachers. That's a really key starting point. How do we make their lives easier? And then how do we engage students in a more robust way, which is a critical part of education. You have to keep students engaged in every subject at every age.
You mentioned that there's a lot of anxiety. Can you elaborate on that? In a way, I understand that, of course, but at the same time, I feel a little bit of surprise that there's this trepidation rather than this sense of great opportunity and welcoming.
There is enthusiasm and excitement for Gen AI, no question. And we've done a recent survey, an education survey, a research survey of over 1,000 teachers in 19 different countries, which indicates that about 54% are actually very excited and enthusiastic about Gen AI, how they will utilize that in the classroom. So a small majority are really quite keen on integrating the Gen AI tools as quickly as possible. I think, though, what we have to remember is that since COVID, Michael, there has been more anxiety expressed by teachers because of the additional requirements, frankly, that many of them have to cope with. And if I think about particularly mental health issues with their students, we're seeing around the world that teachers are having to deal with issues that they, in many cases, were never trained for, they were never expecting. And the shift in student behavior has been significant recently, and it's accelerated since COVID. And I think because of that, there is a general feeling of make sure you provide materials that help me rather than give me yet more to do and give me yet more work to try and understand. Provide tools that will be beneficial to the way I teach and that will add value to my students.
As you think about the products and the offerings that McGraw Hill offers, is that the kind of guiding light that you're following? Is or to ask another way, what's the underpinning of your strategy?
It is the guiding light for anything that we create. And we invest hundreds of millions of dollars every year in our platform technology. The guiding light for us is it must be usable and useful to the teaching community and the students, full stop. If we create something, we can create the most extraordinary material, but if it's not used by the teaching community and students, it's not worth doing. We spend a lot of time really deeply understanding the teaching methodologies. We really spend a lot of time understanding how students relate to the teachers, and that's a key part. And as we look at our own investments across AI, and we've been doing that for over 2 decades, when I think about the ability to personalize the learning process, Michael, that's the key phrase. Because when we launched, we have a product called Alex, McGraw Hill Alex, that really came out about 24 years ago. And when I look at how that personalized the learning process for math and chemistry, it was a huge step forward. And to this day, it's been an enormous contributor to developing the ability of students in those subjects where they get quite nervous. And maths is one where they certainly do. That's using AI to personalize the learning journey. Now with Gen AI, you've got the opportunity to extend that much, much further, because rather than simply, if you like, thinking of STEM disciplines where you've got a right or a wrong answer and you can predict a student performance because of the data that we have, then direct them to a particular path, which will increase their possibility of success. And we've got lovely efficacy studies to prove that. It's great to see it. Now we can start thinking about that with more of, if you like, the soft skills, issues like writing, reading material as people vocalize how they read. And I think we can look at using Gen AI in ways that will enhance some of the tutoring opportunities and the real skill set that students can develop, again, in a very personalized way that we could never do before. Our feeling is, and we've seen that now with what we've tested with teachers, is that they love this because it eases some of the administrative burdens that they have. It means they could spend more time with their students on issues around extending the learning process in ways that they can help the student understand where they need correction and where they need congratulation both. Using Gen AI in that journey gives us that much more of a personalized understanding of how the student is learning.
Simon, to what extent do you think that there is a mindset or culture shift that has taken place or needs to take place among teachers when it comes to adopting these new tools with all of the various new capabilities that they offer?
I think the mindset of the teaching community is ever changing and curious. And I think it is always keen on understanding how can you help me do what I do every day? And if you can show them that you can help them, then they will engage and embrace technology very quickly. We've seen that, Michael, with the study I mentioned, but where there's a small majority of teachers that are very enthusiastic about Gen AI. There is also a large minority that are very keen to begin it very, very quickly in the high 40%. They want to recognize the value that they know they can achieve by personalizing their classroom and making sure that students have the ability to be directed into and improve their success and their outcomes. To be perfectly honest, I have a huge admiration for the teaching community. I was one myself many decades ago. And when I look back at that time, and how simple it felt then, and yet how complicated the teaching role is today. That's why I spend a substantial amount of my time every year working with our sales and product teams, with our teachers and with students, to understand what we can do to ease their pain in many cases as they're teaching, but also to make sure we're giving them that many more tools. And Gen AI, let's not forget, this is a not really a transformational tool by itself. It's one of many tools, because you can never deviate from the critical importance of the teacher-student relationship. That personal relationship is absolutely crucial. And if anyone thinks that you can supplant technology in any form that replaces that, there are going to be many problems for the students and the teaching community going forward. You have to use these tools in a way that augments the ability for the teacher to engage with the student on a personal level. That's where teaching will improve, and that's the only way where teaching will improve. What we do is provide tools that allow that to happen in a more robust way that gives teachers more time.
Subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can tell you who's coming up on these amazing CXOTalk shows. We have a very interesting question from Twitter, and this is from Chris Peterson. He's a regular listener, and he says he wants to know if how McGraw Hill sees the balance between paper versus online content, and will digital content take over completely, and will it necessarily be interactive to keep students interested and motivated?
The business that we have at McGraw Hill now by far is primarily digital, and we view ourselves as a digital education company. We create all of our materials, our products, from a digital perspective immediately. If I think of our higher education business, Chris, it's now fully 90% of our business is digital, provided through our courseware onto the learning management systems that each institution may have. And that will only increase. That number is not going to come down. I don't think it'll be 100%. There will always be a number of students and faculty that will prefer to have print material, and we are always happy to provide that when it's asked for. But certainly the vast majority of classes today are taught through digital materials. There are many advantages to that. If I could just expand on that, Michael, just a bit, if Chris wouldn't mind. But the biggest advantage is that when you think about your textbook, just your print textbook, there is only a certain amount of material that you can gather, and that's what's in the book. When you think about delivering all of that content through courseware, we can embed that with brilliant assessment questions. We can direct you to certain areas when you've done those assessment questions to see where you may need a little bit more time of study. We can embed videos. We can embed study aids. We can embed flashcards. We can do so many more things to aid the learning process. It's what we call pedagogy. And if we have the vast majority of our students using technology, courseware, as they learn the course, we have that much more flexibility to improve the pedagogical tools that we can see improves the performance of the students. We sometimes track, Michael, we've seen students go up by two letter grades when they've utilized our courseware and gone through the assessment that's there. So you can see why that's so popular now. And I think, as I say, that's not going to go backwards. It will extend, I think, even further. Now, let's drop down a little bit to our K-12 business, because there you've obviously got a bit of a difference, where if you think of K-5, some of the elementary education, many schools absolutely require still print products. And that's great. The majority of that part of our business, we provide in print, very often supplemented by digital tools, because again, that's how we can enhance the pedagogical benefits and provide more material for students to use, which we hope is very valuable. As you go up the age range, there's a very good correlation. You can see the growth in digital usage. And when you get to high school, it's really very, very high. And when I think of our medical business coming the other end at the professional level, pretty much all of our medical and scientific research business is now delivered online. So the shift for McGraw Hill overall, we're getting close to 70% of our business now is digital. That's only going to increase. The investments we make are all in digital tools and our courseware and embellishing on the pedagogical tools that we can use, of which, of course, Gen AI is one of them. But that is where we refer to ourselves much more as an education company, because it gives us the ability to reach many, many more students in the right way that they learn today. And Michael, the last thing I'll say for Chris is that I've been doing this for 38 years. I began selling textbooks actually in Dallas, Texas. Don't be confused by the accent, but that's where I began. And not from there, but anyway. And while I was doing that, it was at that time when we were just working with textbooks. And now, as I go back to those same institutions nearly 4 decades later, and I talk to students and faculty, and I can see the difference in the learning process and the outcomes that the students have, and just the engagement they have is so much more robust because of our abilities to use digital technology across all age ranges.
Your digital business today is 70%
Getting close
versus
to.
approximately versus 30 of the non-digital. And you have data that then supports the learning and pedagogical advantages to students of the digital formats.
Students and teachers, Michael. What I would say is it's obviously about the student's outcome that's key, but we are now creating materials that allow grade school teachers to look at every aspect of the knowledge that the students have gleaned. And we're doing this, there's a product called McGraw Hill Plus that we offer with some of our core textbook, if you like, materials across the K-12 spectrum, where there is an opportunity for teachers to see exactly how the students have learned a particular subject, a particular area, regardless of the grade level. We can create, in doing so, a longitudinal student record that tracks the student's performance, and it gives the teacher an immediate glance of exactly how the students are progressing through this graph. And when you look at the circular graph of progress, it's done in the traffic light form, and you can see that they've understood particular subjects and components of that subject into a very granular level. That gives the teacher and then the school, and indeed, if you wish, the school district, they can all see the progress that the students are making, and it helps the teachers keep on track. They can identify those students that perhaps need a little bit more time and attention, but they know that the students are learning, and they're learning in progress, not necessarily by age range, because we don't just want to think about, are they in 3rd grade, 4th grade? Are they reading at that level? Are they doing math at that level? In many cases, they may be at 8th or 9th grade level in 3rd or 4th grade, or they may be in 1st grade. It's the point is, what subjects have they mastered? What components have they really understood within the learning objects that we create? That's what we can measure, not just for the students to help them, but critically now also for the teachers and the classroom.
This is a question from Rashid Gufour, who says, the advantages of AI are beneficial for everyone, but there are disadvantages as well. For example, AI is not human, and in some cases, we can't clearly understand them. So what's your thought about that aspect of AI adoption in education?
You've got to be careful not to rush into this kind of or any kind of technology, quite frankly. And I would say that there are clear examples, and we've all seen them, of what's referred to as hallucinations through Gen AI, where incorrect answers are given. They're not only given, but they're given in a very confident way, which is a bit worrying. It's when the student is told that a certain answer is absolutely correct and it's done with great confidence, they tend to believe that. But very often we've seen images that are completely false. We've seen answers to questions that people have posed that are completely incorrect. And you have to remember, and I'm sure Rashid knows this, but the way Gen AI works is very much from a predictive standpoint. And it's a wonderful ability for the tool to mine and respond to gazillions, trillions of bits of data and words and progressive words as they think about giving answers to questions. And that means, as Rashid says, it's not a human element. And you have to remember that it sometimes can appear that way, which is the danger, but it can very definitely find that the predictive analysis of the answer given is going to be flawed. That's the point that we have to think about, because, and why I said to you earlier, Michael, that we don't rush into these applying this new technology until we are absolutely sure that it is 100% worthy and valuable. Because when you have a trusted brand, as we do, if I may say, over 130 years around the world, people trust the McGraw Hill brand. And if they see our red cube on a product, either on a screen or a print material, whatever, they immediately trust what they are going to read. We do not want to abuse that trust. We have to be absolutely certain that everything we provide is accurate and correct. And we spend a great deal of time and money ensuring that. We operate in very important disciplines like medicine, for example. We cannot make mistakes in the material that we provide. So we need to be very careful with that. So, for example, when we recently created a test generation bank, which is, for your listeners, it's very simply an enormous question bank of about 3,000 questions in a very complex field of medicine. And when you create that, that can take months for a company to create. And we decided, let's try Gen AI. And we've used this tool to create in minutes what would take months. But then what we did was spend a substantial amount of time making sure, with our human editorial teams, making sure that the questions were correct and that they were appropriate and the level was right and they were genuinely testing the tasks at hand. And I think where you can see the benefit as a company with significant efficiency on time saving, in that example, it's clear. You cannot just rely on what you are then looking at. You have to evaluate and have that human element to ensure accuracy and to ensure that what you are providing your students and your teachers is correct. And I would say Rashid's question is an excellent one, because it's too easy to rush into using this kind of technology. And if you find it creates errors, then the trust that we have with our customers disappears very quickly.
This issue of trust and the brand is so fundamentally important. And we have a question now from Jitendra Jamadar from LinkedIn, continuing on the theme you were just discussing. He says, Gen AI has drastically reduced the creativity of students and degraded the standards of education. How to differentiate the Gen AI work from creative work? And I think there's two parts here. Number one is we can debate the impact of Gen AI being positive or negative, and then number two, as you were talking earlier, Simon, how do you distinguish between what's creative writing or hallucinations from Gen AI versus what's real?
I think it's unfair to castigate Gen AI and accuse it of reducing or removing creativity. I do think the question is right in that there is a risk that can happen if students do nothing but channel in a question that they've received from their teacher and they splurge out the answer. Clearly, that's plagiarism. That's cheating by any other name anyway. But then, yes, you would argue Jitendra is correct that reduces and removes all creativity. My hope is, and I'm an optimistic fellow, and I do think there is evidence to show that what it can do in some ways is enhance creativity, because it's giving a lot of students the start. And what often is a real challenge for students today is, where do they begin? And I do believe, and I'm sure you have, Michael, too, when I play with ChatGPT and look at some of the answers it provides, what it does is actually ferment, and it creates the creative juices. It gets them flowing in a way that is more thoughtful and can be more creative rather than less, as long as you are a reasonably serious student. I think if you are an idle student that is looking for the short way out, clearly the ability to plagiarize and cheat is absolutely there. The good news is I think the teaching community are beginning to be very aware when this happens, and clearly there are mechanisms they have to track that. I would say that when a good student realizes that they've got raw material from Gen AI, however it's delivered to them, then they have something to work with. They have more tools that can be relevant and immediately valuable, and it can create a very useful argument. It can be used as a question and a way to debate. Is this the correct solution? And I do think that it would be unfair to accuse any technology of removing creativity, because creativity is inherent in the user, inherent in each of us. And that human relationship with the teacher brings that out. So I don't believe that there's a significant philosophical problem across the teaching community with that. The ability for abuse is absolutely correct. And that's more enhanced, to Jachindra's point. But I would say that use Gen AI, and a part of our job is to help the teaching community explain how to use Gen AI in a way that isn't fearsome, in a way that is genuinely beneficial to the student, again, as another tool. It's not the be all and end all, never will be, but as another tool, perhaps to promote the creativity, to promote the controversial questions that you may want to ask. And think of it that way, in a way that is more beneficial to the learning process. But you cannot rely just on any answer that any tool gives you, including Gen AI.
So fundamentally, as you said, Gen AI is another tool that supports learning and supports that student-teacher relationship at the end of the day.
Exactly. And that's how we describe it. That's how we think about it. That's how we invest in it, to make sure it is a tool that's adding value in its simplest form, Michael. It has to be that, another tool that adds value to the teacher and therefore to the student.
We have another very interesting, thought-provoking question from Twitter. This is from Arslan Khan, another regular listener. And Arslan says, can AI be used to rethink how and what education should be provided to students? Isn't it true that most of what we learn, and here we have a kind of second editorial aspect of the question, isn't it true that most of what we learn in school, for example, figuring out the area of a donut, isn't really used or only used occasionally in our work and personal lives?
This is where I make a differentiation, if I may, between education and information. And I would argue that using ChatGPT, for example, or any number of different tools that are based on Gen AI, and indeed any tool that you may look at, Google, any search engine that you may employ to look at when you ask a certain question, the information provided is very valuable. So you may ask then about the circumference of a donut, and you're going to get a very specific answer. My favorite happens to be a raspberry, I must admit, a raspberry sugar donut. But if you are thinking of an education, Michael, this is very different now. Think about when I don't know what you may have studied, if you studied journalism, if you studied literature, if you studied corporate finance, if you studied economics or psychology. It is very difficult, I would argue impossible, to go through an entire course that is purely delivered to you on any platform, any particular tool, when you need to really understand so many different nuances around the subjects that you're studying. Yes, we've seen examples when a Gen AI tool will ace a law degree, or at least a law entrance exam and a medical entrance exam. But the reality is, when you are a student learning through a 3, 4, 5, 6-year journey in a subject at the higher education level, you need to think about education as part of that. It is a flowing journey that must have a very different mindset than just gathering information. You need to understand the criticality and the thinking, what we refer to as critical thought, around the subjects that you're understanding. You need to debate and discuss with your teachers or your fellow students about literature or about history, geography. Look at what's happening in the world today. These are elements that you cannot steer away from. And we mustn't confuse an education, which is lifelong, particularly through ages 2 until 32, but it's really lifelong. We mustn't confuse that with the information we can gather from a search engine or a Gen AI tool. They are two very different elements. And I'm delighted that that's a good question, because everyone needs to understand the process that an education company takes to further education and improve student outcomes, and therefore, quite frankly, improve society. That's our biggest mission as a company, Michael. People often say to me, what are you really about? And I say, we are about enriching society, because society will only benefit with an educated population. Information is very different to that. And education is a long, very thought-provoking, pedagogically led journey. And it's very important we remember that.
Rashid says this. He is also concerned that AI will reduce human productivity because people give commands to AI and the AI provides back everything without any extraordinary effort. And if that is the case, then where is the learning that takes place?
I don't believe that AI will reduce creativity. I fervently hope and believe that it will actually inspire and enhance students to think about the answers that they receive. And if you plug into a question into ChatGPT, no matter what the subject is, the fact that you've asked the question and you're looking at the answer is already indicative that you're thinking about that particular subject matter. And I think if you've gone that far, then you will almost certainly, when you read the answer, you'll have an opinion. You either agree with it, you take it at face value, which would be very dangerous. And I think Rashid knows the danger that's inherent in that. Ideally, it spurs you, I should say, to think about another item that you might want to do with that question. When the answer comes to you, is it really the only, the absolute be all and end all answer? Are there more things to think about with that subject? And to me, you're engaging in the conversation already, which is good news. It shows that there is creativity in the question. I don't believe that students will only be looking for the answer and then they move on to do whatever else they want to do. There's a risk of that. There's a risk of that happening, of course. But I do believe fervently, and we've seen that in students, that when they do ask the questions, they do think about using Gen AI, the ability for them to then extend their knowledge. And if you imagine how beneficial it is for a program, a tool to show you where your writing skills are poor. We've already said that we've done that with math and chemistry for over 2 decades. Very valuable. Now we can do that with writing skills. That will be very valuable to a student who's about to go into employment. Somebody that needs to really understand where they can make improvements. To me, that's the art actually of learning and adding creativity into how they think about what they're going to answer next, because they can learn at each stage. So I feel a lot more optimistic about the opportunities as long as students are taught how to use the tools in the right way.
And I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I would assume that the situation where a student gets information from the large language, from the Gen AI, the large language model, and pretends that it is their own, that becomes very much akin to plagiarism.
It is plagiarism. There's no question. If a student just literally transcribes what they've seen, an answer through any tool that any LLM gives out, as you say, that is absolutely plagiarism. And it doesn't take teachers too long to recognize that, Michael. So I think when students attempt that, it'll be very quick before they get called out. And at that stage, it's a very different story for the student journey. But I do think, again, it's a requirement for the teaching community to be able to talk about, let's think about how best we can use this tool. Don't use it as a cheating mechanism. Use it as a way to foment creativity and begin the journey by asking a question that can be very difficult to start thinking through. Really, teachers need to make it very clear to students. And I know through our study, particularly in higher education, there is anxiety. There's that word again. But there is anxiety with the teachers that students will be way tempted to cheat, to plagiarize, and that they'll be so tempted they won't be able to resist. That is an issue that teachers and particularly professors at the higher education level are going to face very, very keenly. Again, it really is important for students to understand how you use this as a research tool as the beginning of the learning process, not the end.
So there is a training process both for teachers as well as for students regarding the right way to relate to these large language models, how to use that information, and also how to be critical in evaluating the results, because there have been many examples where people take the results uncritically. I mean, there was a lawyer who lost a case because he got the results back, and the case quoted all sorts of case law that the LLM reported all sorts of case law that simply didn't exist.
Exactly. And I mean, that's a classic hallucination. Goodness me, it doesn't get more than that. And this is where, to your point, and we're helping teachers. We provide a great deal of material to the teaching community, both at the K-12 and higher education level, about the best ways to use AI and Gen AI as you are teaching your class. And it really is about making sure the students understand their responsibilities, how to use the tool correctly. Often they use it in the classroom directly. Sometimes they use it outside, and often they'll use it for their homework deep into the evenings. And that's very important for the teaching community to understand when and how students are most likely to use it. And then it's important for us to provide the tools and the direction that teachers can use to encourage students, again, to use it in a responsible way. And your example, Michael, if I may say, is a perfect one, because again, the confidence of the answer that Gen AI gave when it was quoting laws that just did not exist was extraordinary. And that's why that example really illustrates why students cannot rely on the tool to provide answers to give straight to their teachers for a grade, because they are going to get unstuck without any doubt. Use it as a tool to help your thinking process. Use it as an opportunity to begin the conversation. And that's what we are helping teachers understand across all levels of learning right now.
This is from Chris Peterson, who says, in terms of learning management systems, does McGraw Hill have their own or produce open format content to link into and behind other companies' LMS products?
The answer is yes to both. We have our own learning management system. It's called McGraw Hill Connect, and it's a very powerful tool that's used across higher education and high school. We also have an open learning platform that's used across our K-12 business. These are proprietary learning management systems that we provide into the institutions. We also have the opportunity to work with other LMSs, and we do that. And we partner with different institutions where they may have a particular favorite LMS that we can absolutely integrate our content with. We do that all the time across different institutions around the world.
And we have another question from LinkedIn, this time from, again, Jitendriya Jamadar, who says, how do you think about data sovereignty and multi-language publishing?
I mean, the sovereignty of data and the sovereignty of content is absolutely critical. And the one thing we haven't mentioned, Michael, is the need to respect copyright, particularly. And I think that may be part of Jitendra's question. The sovereignty of all of the material that we create at McGraw Hill, and indeed any company that creates intellectual property, is absolutely sacrosanct. And we are always asked to license our material, which we almost always say no to. the need for any tool, and in this case, Gen AI is critical to make sure that the respect for intellectual property is tantamount, and it really must be. That is very, very key. You'll have seen, Michael, and Jitendra may have seen as well, about the New York Times. They have a lawsuit right now in terms of looking at how they protect their IP, their intellectual property. That is right now, it's a very topical area. For us, it's critical to make sure that we protect, and we will do whatever we must do to make sure we protect the intellectual property that we have. So sovereignty of data and of information and of content is absolutely paramount.
Makes perfect sense that as a publisher, you're very much aligned with protecting your intellectual property from being scooped up and vacuumed up by all the LLMs that have come to market.
Exactly, Michael. If you think of us as a global education company, one of the very biggest now, and you think about the reliance we have on some of the best authors, we have over 50 Nobel Prize winning authors. And you think about the quality of content and material they create, it would be an absolute travesty, frankly, and very disrespectful for companies to abuse that content that these Nobel Prize winning authors have created, and thousands, tens of thousands of other authors that we have across the company. We have to protect their intellectual property. We happily pay royalties to those authors. They deserve every penny they get, and we're very, very pleased to do that, because without the partnership with authors and the academic community, our products wouldn't exist. Let's be clear. And we will therefore fiercely protect that intellectual property, just as you say.
Elizabeth Shaw asks, how can McGraw Hill help address the digital divide in AI? And Arslan Khan says, AI is creating the have and have nots in education. Schools with resources will adopt AI quickly versus schools with less resources. How do we tackle this? So broadly, this issue of digital divide, digital equity.
The whole need to reduce the divide and accessibility and availability of education materials to everybody. And that is still a serious problem. And I think it's a particular problem in the US as well as in other parts of the world. It's a problem in big urban school districts where there are too many examples of students that don't have access either to Wi-Fi, or they may not have the right hardware, the right equipment that they can use, laptops, smartphones. And it's a real problem that we try and address with school districts every day when we talk to them about what can be done within the funding processes from schools to provide the right equipment to the students, and indeed to make sure they have access to Wi-Fi. We create material, a lot of it can be accessed offline. But I would say Elizabeth's question is the right one. Is there a risk that Gen AI and tools like Gen AI will benefit those that have access? And the answer is yes, there is a risk. What we have to do as a company, and my 4,000 staff, many of whom work from a content perspective, we are determined to make our content as accessible as we possibly can. It isn't actually just an economic issue. It can also be a physical issue to make our products accessible to those that have perhaps hearing difficulties or seeing difficulties. And we need to make sure that we are fully accessible to every part of the community. And when it comes to the economic issue around the classroom and what students have materials and what those that don't, we are working closely with classrooms to make sure that we can provide material that can perhaps be shared with students in terms of the material they use and the way they're assessed and the way they're tested. It's very important that we do whatever we can to reduce that digital divide. I would say as a society, we are just on the beginning stages of that, Michael, to be honest. We have a very long way to go, not just in the US, but I was recently traveling to other parts of the world where that is a very pressing problem. And it doesn't take much to imagine different levels of studies in India, parts of the Middle East, other parts of Asia, Latin America, where there are very different socioeconomic issues that really create problems with the digital divide. It's no good for us putting all of our investments as we are into creating wonderful digital materials and courseware if students can't access them? That does no one any good. So we absolutely work with governments and with the teaching community down at the front line to make sure we can help them and provide materials that are at least accessible to as many of the students as possible.
Given that these problems are so broad and so deeply rooted across society, as CEO, how do you think about where your responsibility and role begins and ends to this set of very broad social issues?
When I talk to my own staff and I talk to other media groups, I will say to them, you know, our mission is to enrich society. And in doing so, we have to make sure that we are working in ways that we understand the culture across society. And what I would say, Michael, is the intersection between culture and society and education is exceedingly close and getting closer. And again, governments all over the world, as you probably are aware, over half of the world are going through elections this year, a most extraordinary number of elections in democracies affecting over 4 billion people this year. I spend a lot of time with ministers of education in different parts of the world, and I say to them that our mission is to improve your society by educating students in ways that are culturally acceptable and appropriate for you. We obviously have editorial standards that we abide by very firmly, and we have an editorial integrity board that we refer matters to frequently. We are determined to provide the right materials to help every society, every part of society that we can, because our fervent belief is that if you educate society in the right way, you will absolutely improve the way the society operates from an economic point of view, a development point of view, just a societal point of view where people can live harmoniously together. It all begins with education, and our responsibility that we take very seriously around the world is to improve that education provision everywhere we go.
Simon, as you meet with education officials and ministers of education in various countries, what do they want from you?
They want that acknowledge and acceptance that we understand the differences in one country to another. They want the ability to imagine their progress as a country in the PISA scores. There's an evaluation of 15-year-olds, Michael, in math and science and reading that's done every 3 years. Every country is proud of where they sit, and they want to see progress in how they are performing comparative to other countries. They want to be sure that they are working with a very well-regarded, trusted company, which of course is critical for us. There are hundreds and now thousands of education technology companies around the world. And many of them are very new. Many of them are very, very small. And it's very difficult to know, again, with the efficacy studies, how well will they provide material that will genuinely benefit that society. The one benefit that we have, of many, if I may say, is that because we've been around for well over a century, we're so well trusted, they know they can rely on our content. That's a good starting point. If they know the content is great and curated and developed and peer reviewed, that's a very good place to start. Then they see, how do you utilize technology to benefit the pedagogical learning process with that content? That's another good stage. How do we look at the courseware? How do we think about making sure the students are assessed in the right way? How do we measure their success and their performance as they go through every subject that's there? If I may say, Michael, it's only companies of scale that can do that. And you're finding that the bigger companies now are moving more and more into providing that material. That's why we're growing so fast, because governments, ministers, and then teachers and students recognize the value that we can provide at scale. And if you think about when Gen AI, the real use around the data that we provide, and we have billions of bits of data on students as we see the assessment as they study, which we protect very fiercely, as you would imagine. when you look at how we can use that data to predict performance, it's that level of expertise that other companies don't have. That's where scale matters. It makes a difference because we can be very responsible and responsive both with the material that we have for governments. They look to us as being their partner in providing education in the best possible way alongside their teachers. We do a huge amount of professional development with teachers because we would never ever imagine our company is trying to supplant the teaching community, ever. Our goal is to work alongside the teachers to ensure they have everything they need to help them and their students succeed. When governments recognize that and the fact that we can touch all of those important decision-making points, they are very keen to work with us. And then we're very proud to deliver the best material that we know will work for that particular country and their students.
So the trust aspect comes in very strongly. We've got an environment where the technology is changing, where student expectations are changing, where teachers feel uncertain because of all of this change in the environment. And so they're looking to you to be the curator, essentially, of what's factual.
That's a great summary. I mean, I think they're looking to trusted companies like McGraw Hill, who have been around a long while, that they can rely on for the quality of material that we create and deliver to them. And they rely on us more and more, Michael, at times when there are changing environments around them. If you think of COVID, that was exactly the same then. They wanted to rely on a company that they could trust and know would deliver material that would enhance remote learning. Today, they're looking at us knowing that if we create material through Gen AI, if we provide that particular tool in the belief that it will enhance the student process and their ability to learn, then they will see that. They will believe, okay, if McGraw Hill is attached to that, it will work. And we can never abuse that trust. And that's why we are very careful before we launch any product. We may not be the first in many of these. That's deliberate, because we have to make sure we have the best products using the tools that will be valuable to the teacher, not just be first and be knee-jerk. This is a very thoughtful process. You can never accelerate the learning journey too much with the education community, else you make mistakes. And we're very careful to manage that and protect the brand that we have to make sure everyone sees us as the trusted partner that we should be.
We have a question again from Arsalan Khan. Very quickly, please. Do you think that when I'm smiling here as I read this question, because I hear the premises embedded in the question. Arsalan Khan says, do you think that when companies ask their employees to blindly use AI, are the companies doing a disservice to themselves or even to their employees?
Blindly using anything is not wise. Blindly using AI is too limited. If you ask a marketing director to think about a marketing plan, run it through any AI tool, Gen AI tool that you may imagine, and then you think about the answer again, giving you a base point from which you'll have a debate that can be valuable. So I would say companies that encourage their staff to use Gen AI, that's the right thing to do, as long as you think about what are you going to do with that answer that you've received? How can you embellish upon that? And how can you improve that answer? And you absolutely need to make sure that the answer is accurate, because it may not be, but it could be a good starting point.
One final question from Elizabeth Shaw, who says, how can you address the risks of using AI algorithmic decision-making in education?
The algorithmic process in education is clearly the predictive ability to know the answers that are going to come. And if I think, again, when I look at Alex, our AI program that we've used for maths and science for 2 decades plus, we know that the predictive ability is so correct that it will guide the students in the way they need to know, to direct them to areas where they need to work harder. That is going to be even more the case as AI tools develop. That's what's exciting, Michael. that brings a smile to my face, because it's really then the opportunity for us to utilize Gen AI tools that will really provide algorithms and solutions in an incredible way, utilizing data in the right way, that will direct students to what will be a very robust journey. Again, as long as the teaching community are comfortable explaining how they use those tools, the predictability, because of the algorithms, is truly exciting. Never takes away the human-student interaction. Please let's remember that. That teacher-student-human relationship is critical, but all of these tools around them will help significantly.
The human teacher student relationship is the glue and the backbone,
Yep.
ultimately.
And always will be. We should never, ever deviate from that, Michael.
And with that, a huge thank you to Simon Allen. He's the CEO of McGraw Hill. Thank you, Simon, for coming back again to CXOTalk.
It's a pleasure. It's been lovely to see you, Michael. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you to everybody who watched. You guys are amazing, and thank you for your questions. Before you go, subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can tell you who's coming up on these amazing CXOTalk shows. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you again next time.